In the sound and fury of the war between creationists and atheists, we can be forgiven for forgetting that Darwin was never hostile to religion. His own faith might have ebbed away during the 1840s, but he remained a supporter of his local parish, often working with the incumbent vicar. Of these, the Reverend Innes in particular remained a close acquaintance of Darwin's. Darwin may have come from a family with deep liberal sympathies, but he remained socially conservative at heart. He was a supporter of the status quo, and as the Church of England was deeply integrated into the fabric of the state and wider English culture, he wouldn't have wished to undermine it. Maybe it was this, I say speculatively, that concerned him so much about the materialist implications of his theory. As it was, faith and belief were already having a hard enough time of it in early Victorian society without Darwin's intervention. We think of the extraordinary technological and scientific progress that was made during the Victorian era. We see it as an age of wonder and an age of speed. Think of the astounding feats of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, his railway lines, his bridges and his ships. Think too of the railways and the telegraph, developments that led to people and information travelling further and faster than the previous generation would have been able to conceive. And in science, every single area was transformed by breakthroughs in physics, biology and chemistry. All of this and the vast reach of empire, the colonisation of the world by Europe and particularly Britain. As the cliché goes, the British Empire was an empire upon which the sun never set. And yet, the price of progress appeared to be innate pessimism. Many of the developments within science implicitly challenged the metaphysical order of the universe. Whether it were vestiges or Lyell's uniformitarian geology or the discovery of the antiquity of Homo sapiens, cosmology discomforted older ideas about a benign, God-ordered universe. At the same time, the hold of the church over the population appeared to be slipping. Traditionally, the church's power lay in a stable agrarian society where each person knew their place in the social order and the duties and rights that came with that place. As the hymn so roundly derided by Stuart Lee had it, the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. It has to be said that this verse is rarely sung these days because of the class implications. The transformation to an industrial urban society upset this order and threatened the authority of the church, which struggled to reach the hearts and minds of the new urban working class. It was these factors that fed the pessimism of poets and philosophers. Witness Matthew Arnold, his On Dover Beach, written and worked upon for much of the 1850s and into the 1860s, captures the fear that the major ties that bound society together were straining to the point of breaking. His classical education made him and others all too aware that empires came and empires went, cultures thrived and cultures collapsed, and that the same fate was all too likely for Victoria's empire and the English nation. Decline and decay were in the air. Sophocles long ago heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. We find also in the sound of thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. The sea of faith was once, too, at the full and round earth's shore, lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled, but now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to be before us like a land of dreams. Witness too, Alfred Lord Tennyson, the most famous poet of his day, poetical superstar. Children of my age were forced to learn by rote his charge of the Light Brigade, cannon to the left of them, cannon to the right. Witness him musing upon the nature of a timeless universe and the fearful possibility that there was no God to hear our pleas for salvation or to intercede on our behalf with the blessings of his mercy. Rather, there was an unfeeling, cruel nature, red in tooth and claw, who trusted God was love indeed, and love creation's final law, though nature red in tooth and claw with ravine shrieked against his creed. O life as futile then, as frail, O for thy voice to soothe and bless, what hope of answer or redress? Behind the veil, behind the veil. There were problems too within theological circles. The school of higher criticism, which found its strongest expression in German culture, had started exploring the word behind the word. In other words, the cultures and societies that had produced the testaments of the Bible. Thus, David Strauss's Life of Jesus Critically Examined, originally published in German but translated in 1844 by Marianne Evans, otherwise known as George Eliot. Strauss described a historical Jesus, a human Jesus, a Jesus that didn't perform miracles. Indeed, the miracles of the Bible were nothing less than myth. Reviewing Eliot's translation, the Earl of Shaftesbury said that it was the most pestilential book ever vomited out of the jaws of hell. But pestilential or not, there were a number of liberal Anglican clergymen who were only too happy to support Strauss's view and develop it further. Take, for example, John William Colenso, Bishop of Natal, whose The Pentateuch and Book of Joshua Critically Examined, published in 1862, embraced higher criticism. And of course, Colenso was not alone. In March 1860, a few short months after the appearance of Origin, Essays and Reviews, edited by John William Parker, saw the light of day. It contained contributions from 7 senior clergymen. Not only did it embrace higher criticism, some of the contributions roundly supported an evolutionary worldview. In particular, Baden-Powell, who was Professor of Geometry at Cambridge, praised Darwin's masterly volume, stating that Origin must soon bring about an entire revolution in opinion in favour of the grand principle of the self-evolving powers of nature. Now, none of the contributors to Essays and Reviews were atheists. How could they be? They were all practicing clergymen in the Anglican faith. Although it has to be said that there is a tradition of Anglican clergymen who tread a thin line between scepticism and atheism. No, what they were arguing for was a rational religion that saw the universe operating under ordained laws laid down by the Creator. Miracles breach those laws, which by their very nature constrain the development and evolution of the universe. Science was demonstrating those laws, and Darwin's theory of evolution was a case in point. God did not work by miracles or acts of creation. He was nothing less than the architect of the universe. Rather than seeing this accommodation as a rejection of Paley's natural theology, it builds upon it, while at the same time accepting that there was no special creations, no Genesis, no fall, no Noah's Ark. Rather, there was a law-driven process of evolution, with man at the apex of the process. However, it also meant that once you had accepted this position, you could stop blathering on about the glory of God's creation, leaving that to the workaday business of church ceremonies and services, and just get on with doing science. The accommodation then between organised religion in Britain and its empire and Darwin's theories was remarkably rapid and relatively painless. Of course, there'd be many within religious circles who continued to adhere to the Genesis model. But for now, it is worth dwelling upon the accommodation to recognise that evolutionary theory and religion need not be at loggerheads, and to also help us understand the large numbers of evolutionary scientists who maintain their religious faith. If you just go to the 1920s and the period of the synthesis, you might see Haldane, who was a card-carrying Marxist and atheist, as being typical, but not so. Both Fisher and Saul Wright remained committed Christians. I will end this section with a brief description of Darwin's funeral, which should summarise the rapidity and the extent of the accommodation. When Darwin died in 1882, his immediate family had wanted him to be buried in the churchyard at Down. To be sure, there were no deathbed conversions or recantations. He went quietly to his end, at least agnostic, that was Huxley's terms, and possibly atheistic. But there was no question in his mind or in anyone else's that he would not receive a Christian burial, and that burial was to be in the local churchyard. Huxley, however, had other plans for the last resting place of the great man. He lobbied for a quasi-state funeral, and it was decided that Darwin should be buried in Westminster Abbey, the burial place of kings and queens and other great men and women. Indeed, his final resting place would be alongside his fellow scientific luminaries, Isaac Newton, John Herschel and Michael Faraday, to name a few of them. The funeral took place upon the 26th of April 1882. It was an all-ticketed affair, and aside from the family, the great and the good of Victoria's nation filled the Abbey to capacity. Ministers of state mingled with the ambassadors of France, Spain and Germany. The universities, scientific societies were all represented. The pallbearers combined some of the most powerful aristocrats in the land with a highly connected representative of the church itself and those who had aided Darwin in his revolutionary endeavours. The Duke of Devonshire, the Duke of Argyll, the Earl of Derby, Mr. J. Russell Lowell, the American minister, Mr. W. Spottiswoode, President of the Royal Society, Sir Joseph Hooker, Mr. A. R. Wallace, Professor Huxley, Sir John Lubbock and the Reverend Canon Barrow. The ceremony took place with all the trappings of a traditional Christian funeral, as Darwin was laid to rest to the sound of hymns and psalms and sermons.